I want to introduce these people from Antique Archaeology.
Oh, hi.
How are you?
I'm Danielle.
Hi,
this is
Danielle.
Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
So nice to meet you. Some of the lovely props for the ride. The tie-doll sign is something that I particularly picked out.
I love that.
The day Danielle Colby announced that American Pickers was over, fans thought they were watching the end of an era. What few people realized was that the real story had begun years earlier, with a series of personal battles, public controversies, and unexpected turns that changed the course of her life. So what really happened to Danielle Colby after American Pickers? Why did she briefly believe the show was over? What role did she play in the feud that divided the fan base? Join us as we uncover what happened to Danielle Colby after American Pickers. The woman before the fame. Before Danielle Colby ever answered a phone call from Mike Wolfe, she had already lost nearly everything she had built and rebuilt herself from the rubble. Born on December 3, 1975 in Davenport, Iowa, she was raised in a strict Jehovah's Witnesses household. In a 2016 interview with Flavor Wire, she described the community as very loving but strict, where expressions of sexuality and performance were forbidden. That upbringing, she later said, unintentionally became the launchpad for her artistic rebellion. Her parents added another layer of contradiction. Her mother was a hippie-era protester who once hitchhiked with Hell's Angels, and her father was an artistic, sensitive man. By 2004, at 29, she had 2 children, Miles and Memphis, from her first marriage. To support them, she worked as a buyer at a Chicago pawn shop, where she learned to appraise antiques. That job gave her the sharp eye that would later serve her on American Pickers. But her personal life was unstable. Danielle's first marriage was failing, a fact she confirmed, stating that fame and notoriety later became impossible for her husband to handle. Before fame even arrived, the cracks were already there. Seeking an outlet, she first turned to roller derby, owning and playing on the Big Mouth Mickeys for 3 years, until injuries forced her off the track. When roller derby ended, Danielle suddenly found herself searching for another something that offered the same sense of identity and rebellion that the sport had given her. The answer arrived in an unexpected place, during a single night out that would completely alter the course of her life. So how did a woman raised in a strict household end up at the center of one of television's biggest reality shows? Answering the call. For the little girl raised to believe that the female body was something to hide, the stage felt like a declaration of war. In 2004, while living with her family in Chicago, Danielle attended a burlesque performance starring comedian Margaret Cho and the legendary dancer Satan's Angel. The experience was nothing short of a revelation, and before the final curtain fell, she knew exactly what she had to do. Returning to the Quad Cities area of Iowa, Danielle wasted no time. She created her own burlesque troupe called Burlesque Le Moustache, featuring 9 performers, including herself under the stage name Danny Diesel. The name was personal. It had been given to her by her godfather when she was just 5 years old, inspired by the fact that her father drove a diesel truck. For years, the troupe toured eastern Iowa and western Illinois, building a loyal following. Her ambition did not stop there. By October 2014, she had expanded her reach, founding a burlesque academy called Danny Diesel's Bump and Grind Academy in Chicago's Rogers Park neighborhood, where she taught others the art of the tease. Long before the History Channel came calling, Danielle had already met the man who would change her career. She met Mike Wolfe at a yard sale in Iowa, an encounter so fitting for their future that it could have been scripted. She later admitted she liked his sass. That yard sale meeting blossomed into a nearly decade-long friendship before American Pickers ever premiered. When Mike finally sold his vision to the History Channel after 4 long years of pitching, He knew exactly who he wanted behind the counter. Mike later explained that he deliberately chose Colby to challenge the dusty stereotype of antique dealing, stating, "I wanted someone who did not look like they would work in any antique shop." Her heavily tattooed appearance and bold style became the visual signature that set the show apart. Her official role was shop manager at Antique Archaeology, handling complex transactions and managing logistics. But her unofficial role was to remind audiences that antiques could be interesting to view. American Pickers officially premiered on the History Channel on January 18, 2010. The premiere episode drew 3.1 million viewers, the highest-rated History Channel debut since Ice Road Truckers in 2007. By the end of its first season, the show averaged 3.8 million viewers, eventually claiming the title of the #1 new nonfiction series of 2010 among all viewers and adults 25 to 54. For Danielle, the overnight fame was disorienting. The same woman who once performed on small Midwestern stages was now recognized in airports across the country. The financial rewards were significant. Industry sources consistently report that Danielle Colby earns approximately $15,000 per aired episode. With more than 20 episodes per season, her annual earnings before taxes reach roughly $345,000. This income provided not only financial stability for a single mother raising 2 children, but also the resources to preserve her burlesque heritage. Taking advantage of her television platform, Danielle founded a vintage boutique called 4 Miles to Memphis in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood, opening its doors on January 18, 2013. The name was a direct tribute to her children, Memphis and Miles. By the time American Pickers had established itself as a cultural phenomenon, Danielle Colby had already turned a television paycheck into a platform for artistic preservation, without ever losing sight of who she was before the cameras rolled. But behind the scenes, the bond between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz was beginning to crack. And before long, Danielle would find herself caught directly in the middle of a feud that threatened to destroy everything they had built together. What happened behind the scenes? The feud that split the fan base. For more than a decade, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz were the heart of American Pickers. Long before television fame arrived, they had spent 40 years as friends, traveling back roads together and sharing a passion for forgotten pieces of American history. Their easy chemistry became one of the show's biggest attractions. To viewers, they seemed inseparable. That image began to unravel in 2020, when Frank suddenly disappeared from the series. Behind the scenes, he had undergone extensive back surgery, battled Crohn's disease, and struggled with alcohol addiction. As the pandemic upended production schedules, Frank found himself sidelined and increasingly isolated from the show. What began as a medical absence soon evolved into something far more personal. By the summer of 2021, Frank publicly revealed that he had not spoken with Mike for roughly 2 years. He believed their friendship had effectively ended during his recovery and felt abandoned by someone he had once considered family. He also suspected that Mike's brother, Robbie Mike, was being positioned to take his place on the series permanently. The comments shocked fans as they turned what many had assumed was a temporary production issue into a deeply personal falling out. Frank portrayed himself as someone who had been pushed aside after years of helping build the show's success. He argued that the program had increasingly revolved around Mike, and that his own contributions had become undervalued. The resentment was obvious, and for the first time, viewers were hearing one side of a friendship collapse in real time. Mike responded publicly, but avoided escalating the conflict. He expressed sadness over Frank's departure and described him as a brother. The statement was intended to calm the growing controversy, but it failed to close the widening gap between the two former friends. Frank dismissed the gesture, and the feud continued to dominate fan discussions across social media. For weeks, Danielle Colby stayed out of the public battle. As the longtime third member of the American Pickers family, she occupied an uncomfortable position. She had worked closely with both men for years and understood that any statement she made would inevitably draw criticism from one side or the other. Eventually, however, she decided to speak. In August 2021, Danielle publicly voiced her support for Mike, while also expressing concern for Frank's health and personal struggles. She suggested that Frank had spent years battling issues that many viewers never fully understood, and said she hoped he could find the help and healing he needed. But many fans didn't take that well. To many fans, Danielle's comments felt less like compassion and more like criticism directed at a man who was recovering from major surgery, fighting addiction, and attempting to rebuild his life. Her social media pages quickly filled with angry responses from viewers who believed Frank had been treated unfairly. The backlash became so intense that Danielle eventually restricted comments on her accounts. What had once been a beloved television partnership had now become one of reality television's most painful public breakups. The show moved forward without one of its founding stars. And then the situation became even more tragic. How did a friendship that lasted decades suddenly collapse into one of reality TV's most painful rifts? A wound that never healed. In July 2022, Frank Fritz suffered a devastating stroke at his Iowa home. A friend discovered him collapsed on the floor and unable to speak before emergency services rushed him to the hospital. Despite their years of estrangement, Mike Wolfe was among the first people to publicly ask for support and prayers. Whatever bitterness had existed between them, the history they shared could not simply be erased. Danielle chose a different approach. Rather than commenting publicly, she remained silent and allowed Frank's family and closest loved ones to focus on his recovery without additional media attention. Frank's health had already been fragile before the stroke. Years of Crohn's disease, addiction struggles, and major spinal surgery had taken a tremendous physical toll. The stroke became another devastating setback, one from which he would never fully recover. For the next 2 years, Frank fought to regain his independence. Although there were occasional signs of progress, his condition remained difficult. On September 30th, 2024, Frank Fritz passed away in hospice care at the age of 60. The official cause was linked to complications stemming from the stroke he had suffered 2 years earlier. News of his death triggered an enormous wave of grief from viewers who had grown up watching him search for treasures across America. By 2025, Danielle was speaking openly about how deeply Frank's absence was felt. She recalled his quick wit, his ability to keep people laughing, and the moments when he reached out for advice or support. More than anything, she emphasized the enormous void his death had left behind, not only for the show. Frank's death also became a turning point for American Pickers itself. Without one of its original stars, the show struggled to recreate the dynamic that had made it so popular in the first place. And for Danielle Colby, the woman who had spent years holding the operation together behind the scenes, a new question suddenly emerged. If American Pickers was entering an uncertain future, what would her next chapter look like? An invisible war? While viewers were focused on the public drama surrounding American Pickers, Danielle Colby was fighting a far more personal battle away from the cameras. For years, she had built a reputation as one of reality television's toughest personalities, outspoken, independent, and seemingly impossible to knock down. But by 2022, her own body had become an adversary she could no longer ignore. Danielle revealed that she had been diagnosed with severe uterine fibroids, a condition that had dominated her life for months. The illness brought relentless pain, heavy bleeding, and exhaustion that affected nearly every aspect of her daily routine. Opportunities slipped away as she struggled to manage symptoms that were becoming impossible to control. The turning point came after a conversation that convinced her to seek specialized medical care. What doctors discovered was alarming. The fibroids had grown so numerous and severe that they were interfering with basic diagnostic procedures. According to medical professionals, the condition had progressed beyond the point where conservative treatment was realistic. A hysterectomy was no longer optional. It was the only viable path forward. The surgery took place in October 2022, but it was the beginning of a new struggle rather than the end of one. Recovery proved far more difficult than Danielle had anticipated. For roughly 2 weeks, she was unable to eat solid food. The rapid weight loss left her physically weakened and slowed the healing process. More troubling was the emotional toll it took on Danielle, almost always keeping her depleted. But not every headline that year was painful. In February 2024, after a 6-year engagement, Danielle married photographer Jeremy Shush during an intimate ceremony in Puerto Rico. Unlike previous relationships that had struggled under the weight of television fame, Jeremy embraced every aspect of her unconventional world. Friends and followers frequently noted the ease and affection between them, and Danielle often described him as a steadfast source of support during some of her most difficult moments. If Danielle had found joy with her new husband, how did she go from personal crisis to triggering one of the biggest American Pickers controversies in years? The bombshell. The afternoon of December 3, 2025, began as a celebration. Danielle Colby had just turned 50. It should have been an ordinary day. Instead, before sunset, she would trigger one of the biggest American Pickers stories of the year. According to Danielle, she had just learned that American Pickers was finished. The announcement landed like a shockwave among fans. For more than 15 years, the show had been a constant presence in her life, providing not only fame, but financial stability. Now, speaking directly to followers, she appeared convinced that the chapter had ended. Without the support she had relied on from American Pickers for over a decade, Danielle believed she would have to fully commit to building a new future. More than anything, she seemed overwhelmed by the prospect of no longer documenting her work through the lens of a television camera. For someone whose career had become intertwined with being filmed, the uncertainty was frightening. Then, almost as suddenly as the announcement appeared, Danielle's Instagram profile vanished. The account was deactivated, leaving behind confusion, speculation, and a brief message hinting that major changes were underway. If Danielle expected sympathy, she got a correction instead. Within hours, network executives were publicly disputing her claims. Representatives from both A+E and the History Channel insisted that American Pickers had not been canceled. Production was paused because the network already had a full season ready to air and because Mike Wolfe was focused on an upcoming spin-off project. How could one of the series' most recognizable faces believe the show was over, while the network insisted otherwise? Communication surrounding the future of the franchise had been far from clear. Danielle's anxiety was real, but the information she was working from appears to have been incomplete. 2 days later, she returned to Instagram with a very different message. The panic was gone. In its place was a more measured perspective. After speaking with Mike Wolfe directly, Danielle acknowledged that the situation was more complicated than she had initially believed. The conversation reminded her that the franchise was not necessarily finished and that plans were still evolving behind the scenes. Looking back, she admitted that much of her reaction had been driven by concerns about her own financial future, rather than confirmation that the series itself had ended. Then Mike appeared in the comments. His brief message of support was met with an equally warm response from Danielle, a small exchange that immediately cut through days of speculation. Whatever uncertainty existed about the future of the show, the moment revealed something important. The relationships at the center of Danielle's life remained intact. The fear had been real. The feeling of being alone had not. Was Danielle truly alone in that moment? Or was her collapse hiding a support system she couldn't yet see? Why she was never alone. When Danielle Colby sat in her car that day, terrified and convinced that everything was falling apart, she believed she was facing the future alone. But it soon turned out he wasn't. The Ecdysiast Arts Museum had opened just 5 months earlier, the result of more than 2 decades spent collecting burlesque costumes, photographs, and artifacts that might otherwise have been lost to history. With the help of her family, Danielle transformed a long-vacant 1895 building into a functioning museum and performance venue. In July 2025, the Burlesque Hall of Fame Museum in Las Vegas closed its doors after decades of preserving the art form. Almost overnight, the collection Danielle had spent years assembling became one of the last major physical archives dedicated to burlesque history in America. When she isn't at the museum, Danielle spends a lot of time in Puerto Rico, helping them rebuild their island and also find people in need. The irony is that while Danielle was mourning what she thought she had lost, she failed to see what she had already built. Danielle Colby had survived public feuds, devastating health battles, family loss, internet rumors, and the death of one of her closest friends. The thing that finally carried her through was the same thing that had sustained her all along. It was the people she loved and the life she had built with them. Do you think Danielle Colby would have found this new chapter in her life if American Pickers had never changed? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.